The cold cuts deep at the Gulating, the assembly ground on the western coast of Norway. It is 990 AD. The air smells of sea spray, wet wool, and the nervous sweat of men. A chieftain named Bjorn Ironjaw stands before the law speaker. His voice is flat, devoid of emotion, which makes the words themselves 1,000 times heavier. He is not accusing an enemy of theft or a rival of murder. He is accusing his own wife, Sigrid, of adultery. She stands nearby, her face a mask of stone, her fate hanging on the words of men who own her legally as they own their cattle and their ships. The law is clear. In the Viking world, a woman's fidelity is not a matter of the heart. It is a matter of property, inheritance, and honor, the concept of hither, a man's social standing, which is inextricably bound to the perceived purity of his bloodline. An unfaithful wife doesn't just betray her husband, she threatens the entire structure of his legacy, casting doubt on the legitimacy of his sons and making a mockery of his authority. The punishment for this crime is not a quiet divorce. It is a public spectacle. It is a ritual designed to wash away the stain of her perceived sin with her own terror and blood. As Bjorn finishes his accusation, citing a witness who saw Sigrid with another man near the forest's edge, a chilling silence falls over the assembly. They are not just here to judge a woman, they are here to witness the reinforcement of their world. They are here for the execution. What happened to women like Sigrid is not written in triumphant runestones. It is whispered in the darkest chapters of the Icelandic sagas and codified in the merciless ink of the early Norse law books. The horror is not just in the violence, but in its cold, legalistic precision. This was not chaos. It was order, an order designed to maintain a rigid patriarchal structure at all costs. The evidence for this brutal system is not always found in texts, but in the cold earth itself. Across Scandinavia, archaeologists have unearthed what they call deviant burials. Graves set apart from the main cemetery, bodies positioned face down, limbs bound, skulls bearing the marks of a final, savage blow. For decades, these were simply mysteries, anomalies in the archaeological record. But a 2021 study from the University of Oslo, analyzing skeletal remains from over 50 such burials, proposed a macabre theory. The forensic evidence, healed Perry fractures on the arm suggesting a history of defending against blows, followed by a single, overwhelming trauma to the back of the head, paints a picture of systematic violence. Isotope analysis of the teeth often reveals these women were not local, perhaps captured in raids and forced into marriages. They were outsiders, without the protection of a powerful local family. They were disposable. These bones are the silent counter-narrative to the saga's noble heroines. They are the remains of the real Sigrids, whose final moments were not recorded in poetry, but were written into their very skeletons by the iron blades and heavy stones of their executioners. To understand the terror, you must first understand the law. The old Norwegian Gulating law and the Icelandic Gragaz or Grey Goose laws are shockingly direct. A man had the right to kill his wife and her lover if he caught them in the act. This wasn't murder, it was a legally sanctioned honor killing. The act had to be immediate, a flash of righteous rage. If he planned it, then it became a common homicide. But the law provided other avenues, colder and more calculated. A husband could gather witnesses, bring the case before the local thing or assembly, and achieve the same result with the community's blessing. He could divorce her, but this was more than a simple separation. He would cast her out with nothing, not even the dowry her own family had provided. She became an outcast, a woman without property, protection, or prospects. Her social death was a prelude to her physical one. Her own male relatives, her father or brothers, were then legally permitted to kill her to restore the family's honor. The shame she had brought upon her husband had also tainted them, and the only solvent was blood. This legal framework created a terrifying trap. A woman accused, rightly or wrongly, had no recourse. Her testimony was worthless against her husband's. She was cornered by law, by custom, and by her own kin. Her life was forfeit the moment the accusation was spoken aloud. The sagas, written centuries after the Viking Age but drawing on older oral traditions, are filled with the echoes of this brutality. In the famous Laxdæla saga, the beautiful and proud Gudrun Osvifsdottir incites her husband to kill her former lover, Kjartan. While not a case of infidelity, it demonstrates the power of a woman's words to ignite male violence over matters of honor and perceived slights. The sagas are literature, not history, but they reveal the cultural anxieties of the time. They are obsessed with lineage, with rivalry, and with the destructive power of female sexuality when it operates outside the control of men. The saga women are often powerful, intelligent, and formidable, but they exist within a world where the ultimate currency is a man's honor, and the slightest stain upon it could be met with overwhelming force. The stories focus on the noble class, on the wives and daughters of chieftains. But what of the common farmer's wife? The woman without a powerful family to even pretend to protect her. For her, the reality was likely far grimmer. No dramatic saga would be spun about her fate. Her end would be swift, brutal, and local. A quiet, grim affair in a misty field or a cold fjord, her body disposed of in a way that ensured she would be forgotten. If you find value in forensic history that unearths the lives of the forgotten, subscribe to our channel. Because the archaeological evidence reveals a story of punishment far more macabre than even the sagas dared to describe. The ultimate punishment for a woman deemed unfaithful was often a ritual of profound psychological and physical cruelty, culminating in a death by water. The law codes describe a specific method, drowning, but this was no simple act. It was a formal, public execution. The accused woman would first be subjected to a ritual of total humiliation. Her hair, a symbol of her pride and femininity, would be shorn from her head. She would be stripped of her clothing and forced to wear a simple, coarse tunic, marking her as something other, something less than human. Sometimes she would be paraded through her village, the community she was once a part of now transformed into a gallery of silent accusers. Every eye on her was a part of the punishment. The final act took place at the water's edge, a river, a lake, or a fjord. She would be forced into a sack, sometimes with a live cat or a snake, and heavy stones would be added to weigh it down. The sack was then tied shut and thrown into the deep, cold water. The symbolism was potent and multi-layered. Drowning was seen as a shameless death, an end without honor. The water was believed to wash away the stain of her crime, cleansing the community of her transgression. By placing her in a sack, her executioners denied her even a final contact with the natural world. She died in darkness, enclosed and utterly alone. This method of execution, known as pona culle, or the penalty of the sack in later Roman law, has ancient roots and appears in various Germanic legal traditions. Its use in the Viking Age represents the pinnacle of ritualized punishment. Why the sack? Archaeologist Dr. Anders Jensen of the National Museum of Denmark argues, in his 2018 paper on ritual violence, that it was a form of liminal execution. The victim was placed between the living and the dead, neither on land nor fully in the water, enclosed in a separate, dark reality. It was a way of erasing the person, of ensuring their ghost could not return to haunt the living. It was the ultimate act of ostracization, a legal and spiritual annihilation. The forensic record for such killings is almost non-existent. Drowning leaves few marks on bone, and bodies lost to the deep rarely reappear. But we have found clues. In 1948, peat cutters near Osterby, Germany, unearthed the skull of a man from the Iron Age, his head wrapped in a leather cape. While not Viking and not a woman, it points to a long tradition of ritualistic disposal in Northern Europe. More chilling are the bog bodies. Women like the Elling woman from Denmark, found with a leather cloak and an intricately braided hairstyle, but with a rope mark around her neck, suggesting she was hanged or strangled before being deposited in the bog. Bogs were seen as sacred, gateways to another world. A burial in a bog was not a normal interment. It was an offering, or a way of permanently imprisoning a dangerous spirit. An unfaithful woman was seen as exactly that, a threat to the cosmic order whose spirit needed to be trapped forever in the cold, acidic peat. Not all punishments ended in immediate death. Some were designed to be a living death, a state of perpetual shame and servitude. A woman convicted of infidelity could be handed over to her husband as a thrall, a slave. This was a catastrophic fall from grace. One day she was the mistress of a household, managing servants and resources. The next, she was property, with fewer rights than the livestock in the barn. She would be forced to perform the most degrading and difficult labor, grinding grain at the heavy quernstone for hours, mucking out animal stalls, serving the very people who were once her subordinates. She would live in the darkest, coldest end of the longhouse with the other slaves and the animals, a constant, visible reminder of her transgression. Her husband, now her master, had unlimited sexual access to her. This was no longer a marital right. It was the right of an owner over his property. He could use her, abuse her, or even sell her. Her children, if she had any, could be taken from her. Her entire identity was erased, replaced by the single, damning label of a disgraced woman. This social and legal demolition was, in some ways, more horrifying than a quick death. It was a slow, daily process of being unmade, a psychological torture chamber from which there was no escape. Every sunrise brought a fresh wave of humiliation, a new inventory of all she had lost. The sagas and law codes give us the what. Forensic archaeology, however, helps us understand the how and to whom. Consider the deviant burial excavated in 2009 on the island of Gotland, Sweden. In a shallow pit far from the established Christian cemetery, archaeologists found the remains of a young woman, dated to the late 10th century. She had been buried face down, a common practice for social outcasts, criminals, or those believed to be witches. The position was meant to prevent the ghost from finding its way out of the grave to trouble the living. Her hands were bound behind her back, and a large, flat stone had been placed on the back of her neck, as if to hold her down. There were no grave goods, no items to accompany her into the afterlife. This was a burial devoid of respect, designed to dishonor and imprison. Chemical analysis of her tooth enamel revealed she had grown up hundreds of kilometers away, likely in the Slavic lands to the east. She was a foreigner, a captive married to a local man, a woman without allies. Her story will never be fully known. Was she an adulteress, a runaway slave, a practitioner of forbidden pagan magic? The bones don't say, but they offer a chilling, tangible connection to the brutal legal and social codes of the era. She is the silent witness to a system that punished women with a ferocity born of fear, fear of chaos, fear of dishonor, and fear of losing control. The web of control extended beyond husbands and fathers. The entire community was complicit in the enforcement of these brutal norms. A woman cast out by her husband became fair game. The Icelandic Gregos laws contain a chilling provision. A man who divorced his wife for adultery could publicly announce her as a kven hora, a whore. Any man could then have sex with her without consequence. She was stripped of all legal protection, her body declared public property. This was not about desire. It was about communal punishment, a collective act of degradation that reinforced the social order. Any child born from these assaults would be a bastard, without rights to inheritance or family name, a living symbol of their mother's shame. This legal weaponization of sexual violence is one of the most macabre aspects of the Norse legal system. It turned neighbors into potential violators and transformed the woman's world into a landscape of constant threat. There was no sanctuary. A church might offer temporary refuge, but the law of the land was absolute. Her own family, driven by the need to cleanse their stained honor, would likely be her most persistent hunters. The psychological toll of such an existence is unimaginable, to live in constant fear, not of a single man but of every man. Why was the system so unyieldingly brutal? The answer lies in the very foundations of Viking Age society: land, inheritance, and violence. In a world where a man's power was measured in the land he held and the silver he possessed, ensuring that his property passed to his trueborn sons was of paramount importance. A wife's infidelity introduced a catastrophic uncertainty into this system. Was the son who stood to inherit the family farm and the chieftain's sword truly his son? Or was he the bastard of a rival, a cuckoo in the nest poised to steal a man's entire legacy. This anxiety was the engine of the entire punitive structure. The public, ritualized punishments were a form of brutal political theater. They weren't just about punishing one woman. They were about sending an unequivocal message to all women. It was a demonstration of absolute male authority over female reproduction. The violence was a tool for maintaining the purity of the bloodline, the integrity of property transfer, and the stability of a social order built on a warrior patriarchy. If you value deep dives into the evidence that reveals the hidden structures of the past, take a moment to subscribe. What comes next explores the faint echoes of female resistance in a world designed to crush it. Was there any resistance? In a system so thoroughly designed to control and punish, open defiance was suicide. But resistance can take many forms. The sagas, for all their male focus, contain hints of quieter rebellions. A woman might use gossip and insinuation, the only weapons available to her, to undermine a rival or manipulate her husband. She might use her knowledge of healing and herbs, a power that often drifted dangerously close to accusations of witchcraft or sather, the F. Orbitan Norse magic. A woman skilled in such arts held a subtle power that men feared and respected. The act of an enslaved woman teaching her half-Norse son her native tongue, as Melkorka did in Laxdæla saga, was an act of profound cultural defiance. It was a way of preserving an identity that her captors had tried to erase. For an accused woman, perhaps resistance was simply the act of enduring her punishment with a stoicism that denied her accusers the satisfaction of her fear. Perhaps it was a final, defiant curse spat at the law speaker. These small acts are not revolutions. They did not break the system, but they are evidence that the women within it were not merely passive victims. They were human beings navigating an impossibly brutal world, using what little agency they had to survive, to remember, and to resist in the shadows. The Viking Age waned. Christianity spread across the north, bringing with it new laws and a new conception of marriage. The old pagan assemblies, the things, were slowly replaced by the authority of kings and bishops. The brutal, ritualized executions faded from practice, replaced by church-sanctioned punishments like penance and shaming. But the underlying anxieties about female fidelity and legitimate inheritance never truly disappeared. They simply changed their form. The ghosts of women like Sigrid linger. They are in the DNA of modern Icelanders, which shows a significant imbalance between Norse male and Gaelic female ancestry, the genetic scar of a captive population. They are in the cold, peaty water of the bogs and in the unmarked, deviant burials that still puzzle archaeologists. We will never know their names or the precise details of their lives. We can only assemble the fragments: a line from a law code, a scene from a saga, a forensic report on a fractured skull. Each piece is a shard of a horrifying mosaic. The story of the unfaithful Viking woman is a testament to the terrifying power of a society to codify its fears into law, and to enforce that law with iron, stone, and water. Her silence in the historical record is not an absence. It is the sound of a history that was deliberately and brutally erased. And the earth, in its own slow time, is only just beginning to give up its dead.